Nice to see you all. Thank you for coming. It's a great pleasure to welcome to the University of Notre Dame and the Kroc Institute, my friend John Marks, who was founder and for a long time director of Search for Common Ground based in Washington, D.C., but also working throughout the world. And John has said I should not do any further introduction because he has a video presentation that's going to do that for us, or for me or for him. So Ari, if you will just kick off with the video.
And if you could get the lights off too, that would be a pleasure.
During some of the darkest days of the Cold War, John Marks had a vision that there had to be a better way to achieve a just and peaceful world. He understood that while conflict is an inevitable part of the human condition, violence is not. He saw the possibility of a win-win, non-adversarial world, and he founded Search for Common Ground to achieve it.
Let me tell you a little about John, who has not always been a peacemaker. He first worked as a Foreign Service officer, including a spell in Vietnam during our war there. He was, like so many others, disillusioned by what he saw, but he wasn't discouraged. I met John during his journalism career, and then I watched in awe when he switched from provocateur to peacemaker. He started Search for Common Ground in 1982 and has tackled many problems, but he's always aimed for the big prize.
Our focus tonight is on yet another aspect in the extraordinary evolving relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union. If you find it difficult to believe that the CIA and the KGB may be on the verge of cooperating with one another in the near future, your instincts are probably right. Nevertheless, high-ranking former officials from both agencies have been meeting out in California this week at a conference sponsored by the RAND Corporation and an organization called Search for Common Ground.
In 1993, John traveled to Cape Town to make a television series called South Africa Searches for Common Ground. After a day's work, he went out for a few beers with his South African producer, who asked John if he were married. "I'm divorced," said John, "but I'm looking." "Looking for what?" asked the producer. "A tall, beautiful mediator," replied John. The producer said, "I know her." And the next day, he introduced John to Susan Collin. Within 30 hours, they realized that this was it.
There's something about a shared vision and a shared love going together. And for us, it was when we first met each other, it was that sense of the love that we felt for each other. Of course, it was just the overwhelming.
9 months later, they married, and Susan moved to Washington, where she quickly established herself as John's partner in running Search for Common Ground and in transforming conflict around the world.
What's unique about Susan is this ability to meet people and present herself in such a warm, open manner that you're inevitably drawn to her. She makes you respect her and you can trust her. And that trust is just so important going forward in her work and in her life. Susan's also a spiritual person, and she brings that dimension to her work in negotiation, mediation, and peace building.
We share a vision. We have something we can talk about incessantly. We are able to do work that complements what the other person is doing. We're able to combine the characteristics of two people, which makes us a much more powerful individual and couple.
No one has done more to advance the field of practical conflict resolution around the globe than John and Susan Marks. And they've done it with initiative and intelligence, with head and heart, with passion and persistence to advance the cause of peace.
John and Susan believe that the genius of Search lies in the committed, gifted colleagues who share their vision. And the right people always appeared when the organization started opening field offices in such places as Macedonia, Burundi, and Angola, and when it launched a major initiative to improve relations between the US and Iran,
here for the first time, I experienced a kind of atmosphere, a kind of spirit in a conference, in a gathering, which permits people to open themselves up without reservation and speak out of their hearts.
So what do two presidents in Washington and Tehran do when they want better relations, are afraid the effort could blow up in their face? Well, they move carefully, and they turn not necessarily to diplomats, but rather to private individuals who hold no official position. At this week's conference, Iranian and American diplomats spoke in generalities. But it is someone like John Marks who is actually doing something. Marks organized the visit of American wrestlers to Iran in February. It was the first time the American flag had been displayed there since 1979.
When the wrestlers returned to the U.S., President Clinton invited them and Search for Common Ground to the White House in order to signal to the Iranians that he wanted to improve relations. Today, Search has grown into the world's largest conflict prevention organization, with offices in 34 countries and a staff of 560. Its largest program, which Susan started 13 years ago, is in the Congo. This is a countrywide effort to build peace and prevent sexual violence. It includes retraining tens of thousands of soldiers and police.
We see the media as a really important and profound tool for working in conflict areas. For one thing, you reach a huge amount of people. And so we see it as a way of putting the spotlight on the approaches to peace building that normally people get through dialogues or through a workshop, but then you're reaching 20 or 30 or 40 people. With the media, you can reach millions of people.
Movies and TV around the world are saturated with images of violence and horror. But is it possible to use pop culture in a different way to promote peace and understanding across the country?
It's for a new soap opera series that's taking on one of the most serious issues for Kenyans today, the hatred and violence that arise from tribal divisions. John Marks is the visionary behind the soap opera The Team. Call it soap opera for social change.
The key to peace is to be the peace we want to see in the world. And this is how we do it, by everything we think and say and do. So the answer to the question, what can I do, is such a simple one, is to live that peace every day in whatever our circle is of our lives. And in that way, we truly do contribute to peace. But given that peace is really about walking each other home in a peaceful way, about caring and compassion for ourselves, each other, and the planet, let's do it together.
Thank you for that. Often the moderator begins a seminar by saying that the speaker needs no introduction. Well, after that, thank you. John Marks needs no introduction. I'm Barry Nathan, Director of the Crop Mediation Program, and we are here to talk about John's new book, which is entitled From Vision to Action, Remaking the World Through Social Entrepreneurship. And with John's agreement, or at his request, I should say, this discussion will take the form of an interview rather than a lecture. Tiring, academic, boring lecture. Right. Okay. And I've shared some of the questions already with John. We'll kick off just by talking about what Search for Common Ground does, what its essential logic is, and then what you mean by social entrepreneurship, which is the organizing concept of the book. And then we're going to get into tough questions about Western and liberal approaches to peace building in the global South and the challenges and dilemmas associated with that. Okay. Since this will be an interview, once we've been through the initial round of questions, I'm going to encourage you to put up your hands if you want to interrupt and put the question of your own. So this is going to be a more free-flowing conversation than a dull, boring academic lecture.
So first, I just need to point out that Lori Nathan was the boss of my wife, Susan, before I met her. And so we go back about 30 years.
Mhm.
And I'm very pleased. He wasn't the one that introduced me to her, but he certainly was kind of a godfather figure. And I go way back with George Lopez. David Courtwright and I were project directors at the Center for National Security Studies. I have profound connections to this place and the people. So thank you for having me. Now, Search for Common Ground operates with a basic mantra of understanding the differences and acting on the commonalities. That's the core of everything we do. If you internalize that, you get a PhD from me. Okay. And the idea is to find areas that people have in common, not to ignore the differences, but not to accentuate them at the same time, and then find ways for that cooperation results. So we wound up bringing together the CIA and the KGB in terms of preventing terrorism, which they had a shared interest in. We did that. We've done that all over the world. And once you have that in place, that basic idea, which incidentally was articulated for me for the first time by one Andrew Masando, who was head of the Spear of the Nation in South Africa, the armed wing of the ANC. And we were at a workshop. While I was courting my wife, I had 4 trips in 9 months to South Africa. And the amount of programming in the organization, which had a South African side, was disproportionate to what perhaps others thought was, well, good. But I was courting my wife, and she was very geographically undesirable. So I had a big need to go down there. And I started off this workshop where we brought together generals from the apartheid regime, from the armed forces, and the people from the ANC, including the head of the armed wing. And I did a brief introduction, and Andrew Masando, this warrior who had been into the armed part of the ANC that we don't hear so much about these days, when he said, I know what you're talking about. You're saying, understand the differences and act on the commonalities. And I'd been doing the work for 10 years at that point, and I'd never said it so well or so succinctly. So I always try to quote Andrew Masando in saying it, but it's our basic operating method. It's just sometimes articulating something like that, having an elevator speech, which you can give, makes it much more real than a learned tome, if you will, at least for me. So anyway, we started with the US-Soviet conflict. And when the Soviet Union went down, when it disintegrated, we moved into first the Middle East, Africa, and then Asia. And so we became a global organization. For us as an organization, the fall of the Soviet Union was a good thing because we were able to go global. Anyway,
Great. John, what's the idea of social entrepreneurship is the basis of the book and has guided Search for Common Ground. So in a nutshell, what does the concept entail, or the practice of social entrepreneurship?
Social entrepreneurship is to be able to launch new enterprises in a way that's innovative and flexible. Most people in the peace building conflict resolution area are sole practitioners. They do their work, they might work with a colleague, but they don't build organization. I'm more of a impresario of organization building, and I married a person who was very good in front of a room, who had facilitation skills. And one reason we were such a good combination is we brought different skills to the game. And social entrepreneurs are people who are skilled at building enterprise and are successful at it. So that, but so that's the methodology that I used in going from 2 people to 600 people in the organization.
Now, you're engaged in peace building, and so you're still engaged in peace building throughout the world. We study texts, research that indicates that Western peace building has largely been a failure. And by peace building, we mean efforts by the United Nations, European Union, Western states, and non-governmental organizations, meaning, in short, external actors, attempting to help local societies rebuild themselves after war and prevent recurrence. So the record indicates not a lot of success at all. What do you think the reasons for that are? What are the mistakes that are being made?
Yeah, I would actually think it's a mixed record. In a place like Mozambique, it was very successful. In the Middle East, it's overall been a failure. And I believe one of the reasons for this is that governments don't emphasize it, really. I mean, they say they do, but they don't. Diplomats tend to negotiate from positions and with instructions. In other words, a negotiation for an American diplomat is to go in and get the other side to agree to what he or she says. And that isn't a particularly good way of resolving conflict. I think another reason is there's very little attention or resources put into prevention. It's mostly after the fact, picking up the pieces kind of thing. The money could have gone into Rwanda before the genocide, but virtually none did. And then it cost billions to pick up the pieces afterwards. And I think it might have been preventable, but because we played a important role in preventing it in the genocide in Burundi, which had the same ethnic mix, many of the same issues and the like. And of course, South Africa played a big part in that too, because there was an intervention which Mandela headed. So we did the bottom up and he did the top down, and that's a good combination. And you need to do both. And unfortunately, that's not how it works on the international level. You know, the Henry Kissinger model of parachuting in for a couple of days works occasionally, but it's not an effective long-term way of doing peace building, it seems to me.
What about the criticism that our field in practice is characterized by hubris, by which I mean we think that we have the solutions to the problems out there, that our societies are fixed and well-functioning, and their societies, whoever they are, Burundi, Guatemala, wherever, are broken. And that's because they don't know how to sort themselves out. And so we go in with our brilliant ideas and our money and our confidence. And we think, even though we wouldn't put it as crudely as this, we have the solution to their problem. Does this resonate? Do you see this in the field?
No, that's certainly part of the field. There's no question about it. But I also think that our methodology is lacking the way it's applied. In other words, I think it is possible to do effective peace building, but there very little global resources go into peace building. In the American foundation world, there's not a major foundation that funds it as a source. And there's some marvelous examples of success. The European Union, it may not be very good at doing it now, but it's brought peace to Western Europe after 3 bloody wars, and France and Germany came together. It's probably the best example of peace building, most effective way in history, and it's incredible. But unfortunately, peace building, like making peace, is like a roller coaster with lots of ups and downs. And things happen, but they're not exactly the way we want them to.
What would constitute success, since you've used the term? If we're looking at a Burundi or a country that has been in a war or on the edge of a war, what constitutes success? How narrow or how broad would you consider success?
In Burundi, which is, I would say it was a great success for the work we were doing and the South Africans were doing. They moved back from genocide. They've got lots of problems in the country right now, but genocide is not one, and that's the ultimate thing. Even Bosnia, which may be a bit controversial, I don't like the methodology. I don't like the way Dick Holbrooke did it. He bullied, he coerced, he threatened, but they haven't had people killed in 25 years. So that's successful, but it's not nearly as successful as I would have liked it to be because they haven't made peace internally in their hearts.
Yes. So you're defining success in this endeavor as prevention of worst case scenario.
But that's one way.
That's a minimalist. Yeah. And our students will be familiar with Johan Galton's distinction between negative peace and positive peace. So negative peace is prevention of physical, personal, direct violence, whereas positive peace is avoidance or reduction of structural violence, where violence is embedded in the structures of society. And patriarchy, racism, class oppression would be manifestations of that. Were you working, was Search working to...
Oh, that's I'm listening to you through that.
Oh, okay. I shouldn't put it in my mouth and twiddle it.
It's a microphone, and if we have questions, we're gonna pass it around.
Okay.
It goes into my hearing aids.
All right, great, the magic wand. So to what extent were you working towards this more ambitious vision of structural peace?
We weren't really working for structural peace. We were working to prevent violence.
Okay.
And that was enough. I mean, structural peace was important,
yeah,
but development humanitarian organizations are the ones. So that is in our field.
Okay.
And there's a totality here, and you have to get to root causes.
Yeah.
But in the short run, or the middle run, stop violence.
Okay. And when you're doing this work at the local level, how is it scalable? Because one of the challenges at the local level, whether we're working in the US or in Burundi, is that you can have success at the local level, but it's not scalable easily, if at all. And it's often crushed or smothered by the weight of the national.
Okay. We worked on, or tried to work on the societal level. And in Burundi, through an accident of fate, we wound up with enough money to open up offices around the country, to do radio programming 15 hours a week that was reaching the whole population. Our radio soap was getting 90% listenership. We were doing music festivals, drumming festivals, which is the best way to communicate in Burundi. So if you have the resources, you can work on a societal level. And people said, well, Burundi's the size of Maryland. It's a small state. What about a big state? So we moved next door to the Congo, to the DRC, and we worked across the whole country, retrained the entire army in not being sexual predators and in human rights observation. So you can, but it's a question of getting the resources.
John, what did you learn in the course of all this work that caught you by surprise? I didn't forewarn you of that question, so it's a surprise question, but it must have occurred to you when you were reflecting, when you're writing the book, when you were in the field, that you got something wrong, that you got an understanding or a concept wrong.
Okay. I think that maybe 1 out of 3 things we did were successful. And in baseball, I don't know, if you bat 333, yeah, you're a superstar. Yeah. And in conflict resolution, you're not. So you just have to know that. So, and I hated the failures. I didn't like that at all. But I worked in the Middle East for 25 years. Oh, is that better than it was when we started? I can point to specific things that have been successful in the Middle East. I mean, we played a key role in bringing Jordan and Israel together in their peace treaty by having retired generals from both sides work out the security agreements before they did it on the official level. So that was a great success. but read the newspapers about what's going on in Israel and Palestine. But I think the biggest surprise, well, I don't know. One of the principles in my book is expect the unexpected. And it's going to happen no matter what you do if you're in a peace building role. And one of the examples I give is in Macedonia. We were doing a television program, a children's television programming to promote ethnic coexistence. And our partner was Sesame Workshop, who makes Sesame Street. So it was really good. And we had a deal with the national broadcaster that they would provide us with studio space for the production and go in prime time. So what happens? A war breaks out in Kosovo next door. Tens of thousands of people come across the border as refugees. And MTV, Macedonian TV, wasn't the slightest bit interested in promoting the conflict that way, ethnic coexistence. And a month before we were to start production, the whole thing seemed to have fallen apart. Well, you need to have workarounds. The way you react to this kind of thing is workarounds. So we got an old warehouse and we built a sound stage and we put together a network of local independent stations. So we reached the whole country and the whole thing was a big success. But I want to tell you, if we had had a plan B, we would have been much better off.
So there's some advice, especially for our practicing and aspiring practitioners, have a plan B. I want to shift to your work inside the US, John. And I want to do that because I think there is a concern that many of us have at the Kroc Institute, that our institute, our School of Global Affairs and the university as a whole is not sufficiently engaged in South Bend at the community level, and we have a community that is plagued with different forms of structural violence, including racism in an acute form. And, it's politically sexy to go and work out there, but there's nothing politically sexy about working in here. And we need to change that, and we need to confront what is going on in our neighborhood. So you were doing work in the US as well as outside the country. What was that work? What was the motivation?
When I started Search, I wanted to be 50-50. I don't think we ever got to 1% domestic.
Okay.
This country is extremely polarized, and it has been for many years, going back to the Civil War and before. And the general view in America, and this is a stereotype, it's not, I don't have empirical evidence to prove this, but most people think that Hutus and Tutsis or Israelis and Palestinians should find common ground, but it's impossible here. And the funding world is just as polarized as the community world. We started a program called, I'm in Notre Dame, so I'm going to get in trouble with this, but we started a program called the Network for Life and Choice, which brought together pro-life and pro-choice people. It was our largest domestic program ever. And the idea was that there was no possibility of agreement on the core issue of abortion, yes or no. We took that off the table. But on the periphery, there were lots of ways that the two sides could work together. They could work to prevent unwanted pregnancy. They could do childcare. They could push adoption. And we figured that if you could reduce the number of abortions by half even, and the pro-life side wanted it to go to 0, but if you could reduce it by half, it would drain much poison from the argument and the discussion. And that was the premise. And we were able to organize in 7 cities. We put on a national conference, and it was the only project really that we had to close down for lack of money. We got attacked from the right and the left, both sides using pretty much the same language. So I guess I went for the target of opportunity, which was international work where there was funding available and you could do it. And I never figured out how to do it in the United States. And now there's more effort going on in that area. Search for Common Ground has more domestic programs. They may be up to 5% of their revenue.
Right. Okay. All right. Don't let that put you off if you're thinking about working in South Bend. Colleagues, students. I invite questions, comments in the nature of our events at Croc. You are welcome to disagree.
And if you ask a question, I'd be grateful if you could hold this thing up so I can hear you.
All right. And I'm going to ask you all that want to speak to introduce yourself.
No, I'm not speaking.
Oh.
There was a question.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Well, John, the book is about entrepreneurship. How does one get from peace building to say, I want to give the current generation or the future peace builders principles of entrepreneurship? And what are some of those principles that you put in the book that are a direct result of having been engaged in peace building?
Okay. Social entrepreneurship is the methodology I used and Susan used, my wife, in order to be peace builders. Instead of going out and mediating, which I wasn't particularly good at, what I did was organize projects and organized I put together an organization which was much bigger than anyone else in the world had ever done. In my view, and again, this is not, I don't have empirical evidence on this, but most people in the conflict resolution field tend to be sole practitioners. They tend to be professors who might go out and solve a problem. They're people consultants. They might work with somebody else on a project, but they like their independence so much. And there are very few organizations like Search. And the world would be so much better off if there were 20 organizations like Search with taking an approach, a societal approach and the like, because it's like pinpricks. And so that's my criticism. And I just think they're different in the Myers-Briggs scale. They're just different boxes. One is entrepreneurial and one is people who are good mediators and mediation specialists and the like. And they don't seem to come together very often. And that is a real problem. So I built an organization because I was pretty good at dancing and manipulating and putting things in place and finding money and stuff like that. But that's where my energy went into. It didn't go into me personally being involved in front of a room, which, as I say, I wasn't so good at. But I married well. Yeah, I don't know if they teach you that at Notre Dame, that marrying well is important in this kind of thing.
We might regard that as a rather old-fashioned concept.
If you could pay, sure, just pay.
Yeah, we'll get you.
So in regards to social entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship and peace building, I have a question, like what the indicators or the mechanisms you used to map the sustainability of those social entrepreneurship? Because I myself is working on a entrepreneurship in migration studies project right now in Pakistan. So in that I'm mapping out about the NGOs who work for Afghan refugees in Pakistan for the female entrepreneurship and how their entrepreneurship ventures meant to be sustainable over the displacement crisis. I'm not asking about the refugees in personal, but I want to ask about the sustainability and the mechanisms you used to map like whether the social entrepreneurship was successful for long run or not, because it could be heard in face of bad governance and corruption and everything. And so how can we say that, okay, this social entrepreneurship, it is successful?
Good
Well,
question.
I think it's successful when you are deeply steeped in whatever's going on in your country. In other words, what's successful in Burundi is not going to be successful in Pakistan. You might be able to bring some ideas across, but you need to be deeply culturated. And we all, 80% of the people who work for Surge were from the country where we're talking about. They're the ones who understand their problems. Laurie knew South Africa and was an effective peacemaker when he was down there. So was Susan, who was also South African. So that's the first part. But you can bring in some overall structure. For example, this idea of understanding differences and acting commonalities. And I'll tell you about a project that we didn't get funded in Pakistan. We did do a 26-part soap opera for social change about a cricket team. We didn't use football in Pakistan, and it was about the premise was that cricket had gotten corrupted in Pakistan, which is a true premise. And they weren't choosing the best players, they were choosing the people who had the best connections and the like. So we did a show about a fictional team which brought in on the basis of who was good at the sport. Now, I knew nothing about cricket, absolutely nothing. And I met in the national stadium with the national head of the cricket movement. And to make conversation in the beginning of the conversation, I said to him, so were you formerly a cricket player? And all the Pakistanis started laughing uproariously because he was like the Babe Ruth of cricket. If you Anyway, one of the problems you've had in Pakistan was the polio vaccination. The people who were doing vaccination were being attacked viciously. So I put together a proposal for the Gates Foundation, of all people, where it would be about a traditional village where a young doctor comes back from medical school in Lahore, Rawalpindi or something, and sets up a clinic, and he's attacked viciously for not being properly conservative and everything else. And he wins the confidence of the people, and they all get vaccinated. I mean, that's I'm giving you 13 episodes, but that would have been the flow of the show. And it seemed to me that what we would be doing with that is bringing, if you will, some of our methodology in, but working totally with local writers who would write it in a way that was pure Pakistani. And we would send in, we had a producer. We did TV in 25 countries with a staff of 2 because we always had local partners. And we would send in our producer who had studied conflict resolution and made film in Hollywood. And she would do a workshop with the writers to make sure the script was common groundy, if you will. And that's how we would do it. And it would have been a local production. The first series I talked to you about was on the national PBC, I think it's called, the national broadcaster. So we mixed the two because the ideas, some of them are from outside and some of them are local. But every society I've ever been in has a storytelling tradition, and telling stories that work within the culture can work.
Have a counter comment for this. Sorry to bother you. Before coming here, I was working for a local organization. It was a kind of social entrepreneurship project as well. What I witnessed there as a monitoring and evaluation officer, they were working on the World Health Organization and something. So a particular problem I see in the local organizations, particularly for Pakistan, or like I came from Balochistan. So a problem which I witnessed there is the lack of accountability. the outsiders, they have built some mechanisms for the accountability, like the evaluations report, how you check the indicators and everything, but they never come and visit the sites. Most of the time, it goes for the UNHCR, it goes for the World Bank and everything. And what I witnessed there is the organizations, they did fake reports. They utilize all the money, all the fundings for their personal benefits, and they build fake reports. And it was really threatening for me to see the funding that meant to be used for the people through the social entrepreneurship. It is using for the personal benefits. So the lack of accountability in the social entrepreneurship, I believe it is very much a bigger problem. And like how you counter this, how you make a mechanism that you provide accountability mechanism.
Well, I'm not sure about accountability because I don't know, I wouldn't know how to do that. But I think the way we would work to counter that is by working with local people. Our country director in Pakistan was always Pakistani. We didn't have any internationals there because it just didn't work out. And we'd build trust. And but what you say is a real problem. I'm not going to argue with it. I mean, I would agree that it's mostly true.
So that's a great question. We just a brief comment, and then we're going to get to move around the room. But just to say that it's partly the way in which the external actors are funded. That they are funded by governments for the most part, and that's true also of the United Nations. And so their accountability is running towards the donor. And the donor has a high expectation of rigorous reports that meet the donor's satisfaction. And what gets left out of the equation then, because of the structural relationship, is accountability to local actors. And local actors may be critical of external actors, they often are, but they don't voice that criticism out loud because they're dependent on external actors for money and other forms of support. And so one sees in Africa a parallel universe where there's lots of criticism of the UN and the European Union privately. But publicly, we love you all because you're funding us. So I think it's a very unhealthy structural political relationship.
Thank you. I'm Sarah Sargent. I'm a undergrad here. My question is about the specifics behind, you mentioned how you you're an organization builder and your wife is more of a talker. So how would you, on the day-to-day, what does building an organization actually look like? Like, what are the examples? What do you consider? And how do you go about thinking about those specifics?
Okay. The first thing I would say is read my book. And I'm not trying to sell books, but that's what the book is about. And I think it's a useful kind of approach. And there's a problem with organization building, which I'll tell you about. It's growth, it's success, because as search went from 2 people to 600 people, let me say the administrative, the bureaucratic stuff got overwhelming. And I didn't like that very much. It was much more fun when there were 6 people and I knew everything that was going on in the organization. And that's one of the reasons people don't want to build organizations. They don't want to deal with employee manuals, HR departments, compliance, finance, or whatever. People don't even want to be heads of centers at great universities for that reason. They want to do their work. And that is a problem. And it's particularly a problem in the field that we're talking about, I think almost by definition. So if you want to get through that, but I wanted to make a difference on a global level. That was very important to me. And I had a strong belief, which Susan and I shared, that to make a difference globally, we needed to be bigger. We couldn't have done TV in 25 countries if we hadn't been bigger. And so the things I wanted to do to influence societally, to influence whole countries, required that growth. And some of it was a pain in the neck. I mean, I want to tell you, and it got worse as we got bigger. You get penalized for your own success. So I think where you need to start if you're contemplating doing something. And incidentally, it doesn't work just in peace building. It works in the environmental movement. It works in the justice movement. Social entrepreneurship is social entrepreneurship. And the methodology that I've come up with works right across the board, even in business mostly, where the profit motive may be the same. But I think you need to start from vision. You need to have a vision of what it is that you want. My vision was to transform the world from an adversarial to a non-adversarial place, a rather large vision. But being a pure visionary is only useful if you want to start a new religion or you want to write a philosophy textbook. It's not particularly useful in doing our work. You want to be, and my second principle of this is be an applied visionary. Be able to do one step at a time, build new things, form new enterprises, start new projects, make things happen internally. And then there are 9 more principles that I list. And so really you need to, I think starting from vision is probably the place that you start. Your vision could be to make the world a better place, whatever it is. And we all have them. And you need to be able to say that succinctly. So there was an elevator speech, good idea for your vision.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, John. My name is Mohindo from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm doing a Master's of Global Affairs, second year. So I have like 3 short questions. One is, as I hear you talk and others, I see the fragility of a resolution of building a peaceful community. You may achieve it, but it's really very fragile. So what do you advise and how do you approach investment in building peace with knowing that this is a very fragile result and it can be blown out by any spoiler that come along?
Let me do one at a time because I won't remember the first one when I get to the third one. I think that the way to deal with that is with continuing participation and follow-up. In other words, don't think of it as a one-time thing. If you get something started in one community, try to keep going. And I guess what we say is, there's a chapter on this, keep showing up. And if you parachute in and leave, it's going to be a very fragile thing. But you're right, it is fragile. And there's nothing to be done about that except keep doing it. And also you need to keep inventing new ways. After you've run the 12th soccer match between the local military and the community, people are kind of getting a little bored with it, maybe. So maybe you have to find some new ways of bringing people together. And it needs to be dynamic and continuing.
Thank you. The related question is, how do you now, if you talk about root causes, how do you institutionalize those kind of root causes? Because I know the government has a big role. You may work from the community up, but how should peacemakers also work in trying to institutionalize
Well, you can't probably leave outsiders in the village you've been working in too long. So what you would need to do probably is organize a community organization to do it, or support a community organization. And, a comparatively small amount of money, a small grant, can keep a community organization going. In the DRC, what we did was supported and provided programming to local community radio stations. And we often got them started. We would give them equipment if they needed it, some training, and it gradually took on its own momentum. In other words, they would continue to do community broadcasting and the like. There's a chapter in this book about the work in the DRC, so I commend that to you. But everything I'm saying is in there, maybe not as articulately as I'm saying it now, but who knows?
Yes, I'll get the book. And the last thing is just any advice on fundraising?
I also give what we call fundraising 101, though I'm not doing it here today. I've raised a lot of money over the years, and there's some really important principles. Listening rather than talking is a better way to raise money. Getting really where the funder is coming from. Now that's become more and more difficult with Zoom, and you can't get appointments with people, and in some funders like the European Union and USA, they won't talk to you if they know you've made a proposal, because they would give you an unfair advantage. But you have to find ways, and personal contact is the best way that I know. And then you need to be able to make yesable propositions. In other words, propositions to which the funder says yes. So you need to know what the funder's interested in. And you don't want to ask for anything that you don't want yourself. But there's a lot of space in doing a win-win kind of proposal where it's in the interest of the funder and you. And that's what a yesable proposition is. Most of us make propositions which are in our interest. We don't think through what's in their interest. And that's an important part. There's another chapter on that one. And then there's what I would call the Willie Sutton principle. Willie Sutton was a bank robber in Brooklyn. And when he was captured, it's alleged at least, he was asked, Mr. Sutton, why did you rob banks? And he said, the answer is very simple. That's where the money is. And the upshot of this is you can't raise money if there isn't money that you're from the person or the group you're raising it from. And that we forget sometimes too. So you need to find people. If I made a pitch to raise money in this room, I might walk away with $10.
Yes.
You know, you're practitioners. So if I were on, and in fact, one of my problems as a leader is I didn't obey this too often. I got too much into the work and not enough into the fundraising, but that was, or the core fundraising. And your core funding is what's going to kill you. Your core funding is by far the most difficult. No funder wants to pay for your rent or your electric bill. They want to pay for your groovy projects, your wonderful ways of doing things. And that's a huge problem, particularly as you get bigger. When you're very small, you can sort of put everything into the proposal and it becomes a project cost. But search with 600 people at an HR department, a finance department, which everyone thought was overhead and was paying for, it was always a problem.
But if I can add, Mohinder, there's a lot of money out there. There's a ton of money. And the problem is not that there is a shortage of money for the kind of work that you would want to do in Congo. The problem is that it's a very competitive environment and you're up against professional fundraisers or fundraising organizations that professionalize that function. So you are at a competitive disadvantage and you need to study how they fundraise. So you have to have a separate session with John to learn the skills and the art of fundraising, because, to repeat, it's not as if the money isn't there. It's a question of how you become more competitive to get the money that is there. Julie.
So that's a related question that builds on this conversation now. I, as a young professional, was an intern at the Search for Common Ground Tunisia office. So I'm a searcher, and my husband was at the PC office, and I was a searcher.
So you're former searchers.
Yeah.
You're always a searcher.
Yeah. And I've worked as a trusted partner with Certain as a member of the digital peacebuilding initiatives with my current organization. You've mentioned size a number of times, and you grew from 2 to 600. I work for a social enterprise, if you will, that we have 12, and we've grown from 4. And we've had a lot of conversations about growth, about what is gained and what is lost as you grow. And towards this conversation of, I really see the value of a big size, because you can be a big power player, you can be in the rooms, you can have leverage that uses that size. And I've experienced the downsides in which, because of the size, because of the professional fundraising, it can almost act as like a small planet that sort of sucks resources out of places, and smaller local civil society organizations that might want those resources. I wonder, like, if you can talk about kind of that, the economy of peace building, and if you could like go back and scale differently, like is there anything that you would change about the way that you reach that level of growth, or how that size operates now?
I agree with your analysis, incidentally. I don't know about doing things differently. I was an adaptive manager. I would adapt to situations as they came up. We did a terrorism project, which led us into the Middle East, because 2 of the participants in it said, why don't you try the same approach in the Middle East? And that seemed like a good idea. It wasn't my idea. But we adapted to the circumstances. And in the book, I talk about what the French call on s'engage, puis on voit, which is one becomes engaged and then one sees the possibilities. And that was the main way that I expanded. That's more the entrepreneurial. On the other side, and this comes with growth, is management by rules. And you have to have rules within your organization, but they become much more important, if not overwhelming, as you grow. And you have to find the right balance. Usually, often, organizations are more creative in the startup stage because they're not bogged down on the administrative side. And they're certainly more fun, but which is not unimportant in this particular field. But you know, I don't have a good answer to that one. When founders step aside or depose, usually the nature of the organization changes, and search has changed a lot since I left. I mean, they're doing a very good job. They've expanded by 50%, but it's not the organization that I was running in an adaptive way. And that's just the way it is. It's normal. But it's why Kodak goes out of business and Xerox goes out of business. They don't adapt to whatever the reality is often.
But just to add, Julie, you know, the answers in part your question about growth and expansion and what's the right size. One can answer or address that question as a matter of organizational logic and scale and impact and efficacy. But it's also, I think, for our students, a question of temperament, which is a completely different way of looking at the same issue. It's about, what do you enjoy doing? John clearly thrives on being an entrepreneur, building an organization. Others may have different personal temperaments or preferences. So I think you also have to find your own comfort zone, because at the end of the day, as John just said, his conclusion was, it's got to be fun. Whatever you're doing, it's got to be fun. And if growing the organization drives you crazy, don't do it. If it fills you with excitement, keep doing it. So think about what makes you happy and more happy and less happy.
Right on. Mm-hmm.
Any other observations? George.
Yeah, just one, but it sparked your experience. Ann Hayner, as director of our alumni, provided a list last night of the number of students currently working at Search. in various places. I think there's 6 or 7. And there's got to be more than 24 that have passed through as part of their externship or their first job back home or in DC. So just excuse me for taking the license for all of Croc is to thank you and Susan for the mentorship you gave to people over decades. So thank you.
Thank you. That's also fun. Yeah.
And now there's a request, a need expressed for masterclasses in fundraising.
Yeah.
So in your retirement or post-retirement phase of your life, to offer classes on, you do them virtually, on how to fundraise.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I appreciate that.
In our organization, the program directors were responsible for their own fundraising. So a lot of it was self-defense.
Right. Yeah.
And I would give some ideas and I would come in and go out. But if you, as a country director in the DRC, didn't raise money, we couldn't continue. And we had some superb ones. But it's funny, in interviews, I always ask, are you entrepreneurial? And no one ever said no. And it wasn't true in 90%. Anyway.
All right. If there are no further observations or questions, I think we're going to draw this to a close and thank John very much for coming to talk to us. And I'm not sure how long you're in town for.
Till Saturday.
And so if some of the students do want to follow up, then
I would be glad. Talk to Ari about it, office hours.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I've been doing too.
So I think you know Ari at the back. Students, if you do want to meet separately with John, you're welcome to speak to Ari about organizing something. Great. Super. Welcome. Thank you.